Now to discuss is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's the former FDA commissioner, CNBC contributor, and sits on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. Dr. Gottlieb, always good to see you.
Thank you.
As someone who led this institution, walk us through the process for figuring out whether, for instance, with AstraZeneca, these neurological side effects were caused as a result of the vaccine, and to give that green light, what it takes to get that.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to determine for certain whether or not there's a causal link between what is reported to be two neurological side effects in this clinical trial and the vaccine itself. The presumption is that these neurological side effects were in the active arm of the trial, so they were in patients who received the vaccine. Otherwise, the Data Safety Monitoring Board and the regulators probably wouldn't have recommended a pause in the trial. The things you look at is the proximity of the side effect relative to the vaccine. Were there any symptoms prior to being vaccinated that could have been symptomatic of the condition, and the condition just happened to occur in the context of the clinical trial after the patient was vaccinated. So you're going to look at the proximity of the side effect in particular relative to when the patient got vaccinated. That's going to be one of the first things they're going to look at. And the other thing is just the sort of plausibility, if you will, of the side effect in relation to the vaccine. So we know, for example, in this case that adenovirus does cause, in rare cases, transverse myelitis. This was an adenoviral vector vaccine, so that's going to raise concern that it could potentially be related to the vector. That's something you're going to look at. You're going to look at whether or not patients who have COVID experience the same side effects. So the protein that's being used in these vaccines is a coronavirus-related protein called the spike protein. And so one of the things you're going to want to ask is, can that spike protein be a common link? Can the spike protein cause the side effect in the vaccine? And if it does, then more than likely you'll also see people get the same side effect who have the virus itself. And in fact, when you look at the literature, you don't see a lot of cases of transverse myelitis associated with COVID. So that's reassuring that the epitope, the spike protein, in this instance, isn't causing the side effect. Those are some of the questions you ask. But the bottom line is it's going to be very hard for the agency to say that it's absolutely not related. They can probably proceed with a reasonable degree of confidence that it's probably not related. But what they're going to do is start looking harder for these kinds of side effects just to make sure that nothing else emerges.
So that means we've got all four leading contenders back on track with their clinical trials. Pfizer, which you're on the board of, Moderna, J&J, and now AstraZeneca. What does this do for the timeline?
Well, I think it's good news. AstraZeneca was pretty far ahead with their clinical development program. They had a trial that was fully enrolled in the UK, a 10,000-patient trial. This was the 30,000-patient trial that they're conducting in the U.S. They're a little further behind right now. I think that is probably the case that the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, which I'm on the board of Pfizer, are probably further ahead in their development program because they now are fully enrolled. Many patients in those trials have received their second dose. But AstraZeneca is a leading contender to be an early vaccine to the market. So getting them back on track is an important development. J&J isn't that far behind, and I have a lot of confidence in their ability to enroll their trial and progress their development program. But they started their development program later, and their trial is a 60,000-patient trial, so it's going to be a little bit longer for them to fully enroll that trial. Now, that said, it's a single dose, so they don't have to deliver two doses. So once their trial is fully enrolled, they can start looking for events in their trial.
Dr. Gottlieb, we saw cases here in the US spike yesterday in particular. Are we a month or so behind Europe? And by that, I mean in particular going to be heading for more lockdowns like we've seen across Europe?
Well, I don't know that we're going to have lockdowns here in the U.S. I don't know that you have the political support or the popular support among the population for shutdowns that we had, similar to what we had in the spring. I think you're probably going to see targeted mitigation when the virus becomes epidemic in cities where certain congregate settings might be closed or paused, or you might see curfews on things like bars. I think we're in for a very hard stretch here. I think the winter is going to be very difficult. We have one big surge of this infection before we start to get through the acute phase of this pandemic. But we're going to see some big numbers be put up in terms of daily infections. Deaths are going to start to rise. Hospitalizations are rising. I expect a big number to be put up today in terms of the number of infections that we're going to report today. Given the fact that some states didn't report for 48 hours, I think you're going to see a very big number get reported today.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.